Burning Issy, Melvin Burgess, Chapter 18, Part 1. Now that Jeanette had made up her mind, she was filled with a fierce joy at betraying her family. They had tormented and bullied her all her life, but now she was to be free of them and to have them in her power for once. I trailed miserably after her. It was not for this that the parson had asked, not for hatred and revenge, but for a kind of ruthless honesty. I couldn't find a way to explain it, and as Jeanette chatted away and we drew nearer again to Cologne, my heart grew blacker and darker and more miserable. I could see nothing honest in myself either. I asked Jeanette about Iron's story, that the witch's god was not the devil at all, but some older than the Christian god, a god of animals and of the fields. Yes, she had heard that story. Some of the other witches had told her that even though he had horns like the devil, that was only a sign that he was the lord of the beasts as well as lord of men. They said that old Demdike had forgotten who he was and had come to believe that all the Christian stories about Satan and devil worship. These witches wanted to help and not harm, and claimed their god was more like a Christian god than the devil. But Demdike scoffed at them and said they were fooling themselves, and that it would be worse for them in hell if they did not harm as their master wished them to. What was false? What was good? What was bad? I had no idea where to start. Jeanette held me tightly by the hand and pulled me into Cologne town to confess to the Christian priests and turn our own people over to the gallows. We never made it. When we reached Cologne, it became clear that everything was already up with us. We came out on a track with some scattered wooden houses by it leading into the main part of town. We were only a little way up the road when we were recognised. "There's the little witch!" someone shouted. People ran up to see us, and soon we were surrounded by a crowd, men and women and children, young and old, hooting and shouting angrily at us. "You're going to be hanged, Jeanette Demdike!" someone shouted. A cry of approval went up. Someone threw a stone that struck her arm, and it must have hurt her terribly, because she cried out and nearly fell. She had so little flesh, but she pulled herself up and pushed forward, trying not to show it. "We're going to confess and get our souls back," she shouted. "I'll be as good as any of you." That shut some of them up, but one shouted out, "It's too late to confess now, you little witch. They're out hunting you down this minute." "She's trying to get out of it now she knows it's all up," cried another. This angered the crowd further, and they pushed closer to us. And the other one's a witch too. She's the one they say burned Baldwin." They backed off when they heard that. It seemed I was famous in my own town, but by now the street was packed with people, and we had to struggle amongst them to move up the road. We were only two small girls, pushed and shoved by grown men and women, and they soon discovered we couldn't harm them. Finally, a group of men decided confession was too good for us. They seized us, dragged us up a lane away from the parsonage towards the magistrate's house. The crowd was getting bigger all the time, very angry and very excited. I thought they would kill us. We were lifted up into the air and carried along a flood of screaming people, punching and poking at us as we passed overhead. Then we were thrown down onto the cobbles and kicked up the magistrate's door. Some big brute stood over us, bellowing, "Here's 2 more witches for the gallows," and kicked viciously at our legs. Then the door opened and a footman dragged us inside. The lackey who pulled us in was not an unkind man. He gave us some milk and oatcakes and checked us to make sure we had no broken bones. When he handed us over to the jailer, we had no doubt we were prisoners. He took us down underground, along a passage and past a number of heavy doors. He unlocked one of these and motioned us to enter. Inside was a low cellar, too low to stand upright in. The floor was damp mud. There was nothing to sit or lie on. All we had for a latrine was a bucket in the corner. The magistrate was out with Baldwin even. He came back late and ate. He stayed down there for about 5 hours before we were summoned up to confess. There were 3 men waiting for us. Magistrate Noel and Parson Holden was with him, which I was grateful for. But on the other side was Baldwin, the witch finder. His face was still scarred, bright red streaks, and his mouth hardened when I came in. "That's her, the worst of them," he hissed when he saw me. Jeanette glanced at me. "We were coming to confess," she said in a shrill voice. "They were on their way to the parsonage when the crowd took them," agreed Parson Holden. But Baldwin shook his head. "No witch ever confessed without persuasion," he said. I knew what sort of persuasion he had in mind. Jeanette seized my arm. "Issy told me that if I confessed myself and my family, God would take my soul back from the devil." I saw their eyebrows go up at this remark, but Jeanette went on. "I never wanted it. They made me do it, Demdike and the rest. They said that once the devil had my soul, I'd never be able to get it back. But if they were lying, I'd like very much to get it back," she appealed to Parson Holden. "She said you told her, sir, you wouldn't tell Issy a lie, would you, sir?" Holden nodded, and the magistrate agreed. "If you truly repent, God will forgive you," he said. "Do you really want to live a Christian life, Jeanette?" asked Holden earnestly. Jeanette nodded fervently. "And are you willing to tell us everything we want to know?" he asked. "Everything against them. I don't owe them anything," swore Jeanette. The parson nodded. "Then there's no reason why you shouldn't lead a long and useful Christian life," he said, glancing up at the magistrate, who in turn glanced at the witch finder, but nodded in agreement. "God will certainly forgive you. He has promised that. As for justice, we will do all we can for you if you confess fully." Baldwin twisted irritably in his chair. "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," he snapped. "It's not for a man to forgive her. She must be sent to her Maker for judgment. Why take her word for it when I can squeeze all we need to know out of her? Leave her with me for an hour and I'll tell you everything she knows." Noel looked coldly at him. "I've seen enough of your work," he growled. "Besides, we need some voluntary information. The judge at Lancaster might well not accept information if you have to break bones to get it." Baldwin curled his lip. I gathered that he thought the Lancaster judge was a tougher man than Noel made out, but the magistrate had his way. He called in a clerk to take us down to Jeanette's words, and she began to talk. End of chapter 18, part 1.